Corporations, other legal entities. Sabrina, what is a legal entity versus a corporation? Key definitions. Legal entity. It is any physical person, you or me, or legal person. Corporations, partnerships, trusts, associations, organizations, etc., that has recognized capacity to enter into legally binding agreements, obligation, can sue or be sued, and is held responsible for their actions and omission. Corporation. It is a legal entity formed under the laws of a country or state that is separate and distinct from its owners, shareholders, stockholders. It follows a specific purpose. Its owner's liability is limited to the corporation's creditors, obligors only up to the resources, investment in the corporation, unless they give her personal guarantees. Its duration's lifespan is unlimited. It will exist until it is expressly dissolved. Company. It is a legal entity that engages in business and can be a proprietorship, partnership, or corporation. In the USA, each of the 50 states has its own laws, so each has slight variations as to the types of corporations and their legal framework. A few basic types of legal entities. 1. Partnerships, not a corporation. 2. DBA, doing business as can be a corporation. 3. LLC, limited liability company. 4. S corporation, company's taxes are paid by owners. 5. C corporation, classic corporation. There are more proprietorships, foundations, etc., depending on the country. A few basic types of legal entities. 1. Self-employed. 2. Partnerships, not a corporation. 3. SL. Sociedad Limitada equals LLC, limited liability company. 4. New company LLC, advantages the first years. 5. SA. Sociedad Anónima equals classic corporation. There are more proprietorships, foundations, etc., depending on the country. LLC equals limited liability company. It is a company that has less restrictions, is easier to manage, and makes life less complicated for those that want to do business without risking their personal assets, while keeping it simple so they can focus on their business and not on legal requirements. They are becoming a more popular business entity for new companies because it combines the limited owner liability of the A corporation with the tax efficiencies and flexibility of a partnership. Key features. 1. Owners. Owners of LLCs are called members. They can be individuals, companies, or foreign entities. 2. Taxes. In some countries, USA, and LLC is not taxed as a business entity. Their members are taxed as persona income. In others, Spain, it is taxed exactly the same as a corporation, which may have a much lower tax rate. Spain, 25%, 15% on is 2 years, much lower than personal income taxes. Much lower than personal income taxes. 3. Liabilities. Members are typically not directly responsible for the debts of an LLC. Their liability is limited to their investment in the LLC. 4. Record keeping. LLCs are required to submit annual reports but have less requirements in general, not required to hold annual sharehold. Sabrina, we have also an LLC. Record-keeping LLCs are required to submit annual reports but have less requirements in general, not required to hold annual shareholder meetings or be audited, etc. Management LLC's operation is flexible like a partnership. Generally, an operating agreement is not required, but it is recommended. LLC versus Corp. Advantages: fewer ownership restrictions, limited owner liability, less record keeping, better profit, sharing tax flexibility, only in the USA, not in Spain. Disadvantages: owners subject to self-employment taxes, limited life if a member leaves, higher taxes and fees in some states, fewer benefits like group medical insurance. We have some of Spain's legal entities. Overview of option for new businesses. Main options for a new business venture: self-employed, autónomo, limited liability entrepreneur, ERL, empresario de responsabilidad limitada, SALES, L, Sociedad de Responsabilidad Limitada, LLC of Successive Formation, Sociedad Limitada de Formación Sucesiva, New Company LLC, SLN, E, Sociedad Limitada Nueva Empresa, Advantages Initial Years, Corporation SA, Sociedad Anónima, LLC of Successive Formation, no minimum capital but has other limitations instead to protect customers. It turns into an LLC once you invest capital in the company, which can be done slowly as your company makes money. 20% of your benefits until you reach 3-0 row. LLC of Successive Formation Obligations. the obligatory allocation to legal reserve of an amount at least equal to 20% of the annual profits, with no limit until 3.0. Once such legal or statutory requirements have been fulfilled, dividends may only be distributed to the partners if the net asset value is, as a consequence of such distribution, not below 60% of the minimum legal capital. The annual amount of the remuneration paid to shareholders, partners, and directors in these fiscal years may not exceed 20% of the net assets of the corresponding fiscal year, notwithstanding other remunerations that they could receive as employees of the company or through the rendering of professional services agreed by the company with said shareholders, partners, and directors. 17 Personal status requirements: citizenship, residency, nationality. You do not need to be a Spanish or EU citizen or resident to establish a corporation in Spain, but you will have to obtain a Spanish identification number, either a NIF or a NIE. If you are not a Spanish or EU citizen, you must have a valid work visa in Spain to be able to work in that company or be self-employed. Tax identification number, NIF, and foreigner identity number, NIE. The currently applicable Spanish legislation requires that any individual or legal entity with economic or professional interests in Spain, or involved in a relevant way for tax purposes, must hold a tax identification number, in the case of legal entities, or a foreigner identity number for individuals. Spain's legal entities. How long does it take? Incorporating a company in Spain takes approximately between 1 week and 1 month, which could take longer given the process to obtain a tax identification number and a foreigner's ID number, granting powers of attorney, gather other needed documentation and internal decision of the founders. In sharp contrast, a new company LLC can be created and operating in just 48 hours. Limited Liability Entrepreneur, ARL. Concept. ERL status can be taken on by an individual entrepreneur, regardless of their business or professional activity, to limit their liability for the debt deriving from the conduct of their business, which will prevent any such debt from affecting their principal residence under certain conditions. It makes an exception to the limited liability regime for any public law debts acquired by the ERL, the collection of which is subject to the provisions of general taxation law. Requirements. 1. Registration of ERL status at the commercial registry. 2. Value of the principal residence, 300, 0 maximum, some exceptions. 3. Disclosure of ERL status. It must be mentioned on all documentation. 4. Registration at the property registry. Case studies. Google Companies YouTube LLC. Google is a corporation and YouTube is an LLC. Both are registered in Delaware, USA. Why did they choose different entity types? The LLC versus corporation distinction is clearly defined by this one example that the new generation of entrepreneurs should take advantage of. YouTube actually started as a corporation, filing its certificate of incorporation with the Delaware Division of Corporations on October 3, 2005. On November 8, 2006, just 13 months and 5 days later, it merged its corporation into an LLC, which is one of the key advantages of Delaware companies. They can change from one form of entity to another whenever they want. YouTube LLC, on the other hand, is owned by a few members. Nobody but the insiders know how few, and nobody but the insiders know who the owners are. In addition, nobody but the owners know what the Google Co. vs. YouTube LLC company finances are, because no public disclosure is required. That's the benefit of a Delaware LLC. Your members, their ownership percentages, and your financial valuation are private matters, of which only the company insiders are aware. There is no public registration, no public disclosure, and no federal requirement of any type that necessitates the owners of a Delaware LLC to reveal who they are on the public record. Google chose to be a Delaware corporation so it could go public and raise money, which they did on August 16, 2004. Once it did so, it quickly became one of the richest companies in history. Google's rise to power created tens of thousands of millionaires and a lot of billionaires. Even though 60% of Google is owned by institutions, there are millions of individual shareholders in the company. The company has current cash reserves of $50 billion. Why an LLC might be best for your business? Given that it takes far less red tape to organize and is generally cheaper to administer, the LLC might be your best choice if you're a new business owner or operate an internet business, says Eka. There is also another key benefit of LLCs. You can elect to be taxed as an S-Corp while retaining the structure of an LLC. Consider the case of Mike Turner, founder of Front Street Brokers, a real estate agency in Boise, Idaho. When he started his business, which sells high-end homes and properties, he was advised to form it as an LLC, which he did. However, a couple years later, as the business began to earn more revenue, Turner was shocked by the amount of taxes he was paying the IRS. Why an LLC might be best for your business. It was then that his accountant told him how he could elect to be taxed like an S-corp while keeping his LLC intact. Turner decided to make the switch. He began paying himself and his wife a modest salary, which he also pays fees on, such as FICA and unemployment insurance, and then paying himself a monthly dividend from the extra profits his company was earning. The rules are I must pay myself a realistic salary, says Turner. I can't pay myself minimum wage and do the rest in dividends. But in my industry, the average salary is not that high, so I can still take a hefty amount via the dividends. The difference has been a savings of between 60 and 80 a year in federal taxes. I feel I get the best of both worlds, he says. For my small business, I get all the legal benefits of running my small business through an LLC, but I can be taxed as an S-corp, which saves me money at tax time. Why an S-corp might be the better choice. While Turner's story is a compelling one for a smaller lifestyle business, the truth is that fast-growing businesses that plan to bring on investors or share the ownership of the company with employees may need to consider making the switch to an S-corp sooner rather than later. Consider the case of Vicki Phillips, the founder of GetEducated.com, which provides guides and ratings for college courses and programs offered online. Phillips originally started her business, which is based in Burlington, Vermont, as an LLC and has kept it that way for 10 years. But now that her business is established, it now earns $1 million in annual revenue. She's ready to bring on investors to expand even faster. In talking to her advisors, she came to realize that it was in her best interest to convert her company into an S-corp, despite some why an S-corp might be the better choice of the disadvantages of doing so. There's much more paperwork required to substantiate everything, she says, since running an S-corp requires you to hold meetings, keep minutes, make resolutions, elect officers, and produce formal financial statements. But the S-corp structure creates more separation between me and the company, which is something that investors and bankers are more comfortable with. Phillips says that she spent about 60 on attorney and accountant fees making the switch over from an LLC, the assets of which were essentially bought by the new S-corp, though she admits she could have spent less if she had been willing to do more of the paperwork herself. I'm not a huge fan of more paperwork, which is one of the key reasons we held off on making the switch for as long as we did, she says. Why an S-corp might be the better choice of the disadvantages of doing so. There's much more paperwork required to substantiate everything, she says, since running an S-corp requires you to hold meetings, keep minutes, make resolutions, elect officers, and produce formal financial statements. But the S-corp structure creates more separation between me and the company, which is something that investors and bankers are more comfortable with. Phillips says that she spent about 60 on attorney and accountant fees making the switch over from an LLC, the assets of which were essentially bought by the new S-corp, though she admits she could have spent less if she had been willing to do more of the paperwork. Phillips says that she spent about 60 on attorney and accountant fees making the switch over from an LLC, the assets of which were essentially bought by the new S-corp, though she admits she could have spent less if she had been willing to do more of the paperwork herself. I'm not a huge fan of more paperwork, which is one of the key reasons we held off on making the switch for as long as we did, she says. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.